if anybody has any last minute questions, like I said, just let me know. You can just throw them in the chat and I'll be with you guys the entire time. Good luck, everybody. It's going to be a good one.
Streaming about a minute out. Gilly, you may need to react quick and read screen share. Can't promise what's this is going to look like online right now, but we can. It's 1 o'clock. If everyone's ready, thumbs up. Perfect. And we'll be raising the microphones now. And Vanessa, you can begin your 10 count in your head. And when you get to 0, begin speaking, and I'll take you right to screen.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event, Detecting and Tracking Xenophobic Speech on Social Media to Inform Policy. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Vanessa Olguin, and I'm a senior majoring in government in the College Scholar program and minoring in migrations. I'm a part of this year's cohort of Migration Scholars, a fantastic group of undergraduates passionate about migration studies and research in collaboration with the Migrations Initiative. I'm especially excited for our event today on the Xenophobia Meter project, an initiative that I've been lucky enough to help out with this past year. Thank you to eCornell and Cornell University's Migrations Initiative for hosting this discussion. The interdisciplinary initiative studies how all living things migrate from place to place on our planet, and you can engage with more of this work through upcoming activities and events this semester. As we begin today's program, I would like to first acknowledge the land on which we are on today. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayohono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayohono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gayohono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gayohono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. This acknowledgement does not exist in the past tense or historical context, but with the recognition that colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build mindfulness around our present participation. Now, I'm excited to introduce Professor Wendy Wilford, the Vice Provost for International Affairs and the Robert A. and Ruth E. Colson Professor of Global Development in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and good afternoon, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today for this talk. My name is Wendy Wilford, as Vanessa said, and before we get started, I want to take another few minutes to discuss the broader migrations initiative that both Vanessa and I and Gilly and Shannon, who you'll meet soon, are part of. What we call the Migrations Global Grand Challenge brings together faculty and students from across Cornell, along with community partners and the broader public, so you all, but alumni, other organizations, nonprofit organizations, and other educational institutions to research, learn about, and engage in questions of migration. We define migration very broadly as the movement of humans and non-humans and the context in which they move. We believe that migration is one of the most important and challenging issues of our time, and we believe that understanding the complicated issues around movement requires new ways of thinking and working. So just to provide some context, in 2019 alone, approximately 300 million people migrated across international borders, and many more than that migrated within nations, particularly from rural to urban areas or from coastal areas inland. And although we do tend to think of humans when we talk about migration, it isn't just humans moving, of course, it's animals and plants too, often together. And as the planet warms and our populations grow, along with rising inequality and geopolitical tensions, all of these migrations are increasing and influencing one another and influencing the communities they move to and from. So I might not move and you might not move, but the food we eat, the people we know, the viruses that we contract, the politicians we have in office, migration affects all of this. As the world moves in these new ways, we argue that we need to adapt as well. So here at Cornell University, we have world-leading scholars of migration in almost every college on campus, but these students and faculty have tended to work in ways that are relatively decentralized and also isolated. So people who work on human migration tend to be separate from people who work on issues related to animals or plants. And in the humanities and social sciences, as another example, one really relevant to our conversation today, people who work on race and migration tend to do so separately, even though we know that these issues are very closely related. So the Migrations Initiative is trying to push against the university's disciplinary norms to think instead of concrete issues or challenges, ones that require multiple perspectives, as well as partnership with communities well beyond the door of the university. In 2020, the Migrations Initiative received support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. This was part of the Mellon Foundation's Just Futures initiative, and it allows us to deepen our exploration of the relationship between racism, dispossession, and migration. Slavery, colonization, indigenous dispossession, and war have all driven migration, as well as other related patterns of racial violence, of urban segregation, and health disparities. Here in the US, even when they're welcomed, many non-white persons are marked by their presumed border crossing or not quite belonging. So our program responds to historical and ongoing nativist and racialized violence in the US by acknowledging Cornell's role in these dispossessions and exclusions, as Vanessa pointed out. And with support from the Mellon Foundation, we're trying to create collaborative research, learning, and public engagement spaces, bringing together expertise from multiple disciplines, multiple temporal periods, so thinking about the past and present and future together, and multiple geographic scales is really necessary to fully analyze the intersections and implications of racism, dispossession, and migration. Our program revolves around 3 interdisciplinary themes. So we take on migration, racism, and dispossession more broadly, but we've really identified 3 themes as being critical. The first theme is authority, governance, and racial injustice. Within this theme, we focus on a range of regulatory institutions and social hierarchies that shape migrations. So national governments, of course, are a key focus. They're probably the world's primary apparatus for regulating migrations, reifying new ethno-racial categories or eradicating them from public discourse. Supranational and regional institutions also police migrant flows and regulate migrant life. Much of the focus here has been on urban migrant destinations, but often invisible migrant communities who are in rural districts. They labor in dairies and orchards and fields and meat packing plants in rural regions, and their presence is also transforming race relations, local governments, and the built environments of these communities, often triggering right-wing nativist political agendas. Our second theme is climate, dispossession, and natural and built environments. We study the momentous shifts in multi-species global migrations and the way that these are shaped by environmental factors and in turn shape the environments around them. Environmental justice is, of course, a cornerstone of both racial justice and migrant rights. Climate change is increasingly reshaping habitable spaces, and coastal cities and populations are becoming increasingly vulnerable, leading to massive upheaval and new migrations. But attempts to protect these spaces or to protect pristine habitats must also grapple with the rights of vulnerable groups and indigenous groups to preserve their spaces, their territories, and life worlds. Additionally, as we've seen so recently and powerfully, disease and the flow of pathogens is a key pressing issue, one that's often weaponized to restrict or surveil movement. Our third theme is trafficking, displacement, and the right to stay home. The study of migration can't assume a desire to relocate. Rather, we also have to study those who stay home and the right to do so. With the exception of the privileged cosmopolitans, you might say, most migrants opt to leave their home when staying put becomes untenable. So studying migration means studying inequality and insecurity, both within nations and between or across them. Our multidisciplinary agenda in this Migrations Initiative and seminar is to advance collaborative research, pedagogy, and engagement. So we hope that you'll continue to participate in the seminar series throughout this semester and visit our website to learn more about the Migrations Initiative. Thank you. I'll turn it over now to Shannon Gleason. Shannon is one of our two co-chairs of the Migrations Initiative, along with Eric Tagliacozzo. Shannon is professor and chair of labor relations, law, and history at the Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you, Wendy. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, who will be presenting on research that she and her colleagues have been engaged in for some time now. And so it's very exciting to see the fruits of their labor on the Xenophobia Meter project. Gilly Lache is a senior lecturer in the Department of Information Science here at Cornell. Her teaching and research interests are in human-computer interaction and computer-supported cooperative work. She uses quantitative and qualitative methods and technology design to examine how individuals and groups achieve their goals and the roles information technology plays in these interactions. She's particularly interested in designing interactive technologies that empower marginalized populations, like what we'll be talking about today. And some of her works include visually impaired users of social media, smallholder coffee farmers in Latin America, and Amazon Mechanical Turk workers, a broad variety. She's the director of the Master's of Professional Studies in Information Science and is the faculty supervisor of the Design and Tech Initiative project team. I'm really thrilled to have her here to talk about this new exciting work. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Gilly.
Thank you, Shannon. And welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to present for the first time this project that we have been working on for a while now, the Xenophobia Meter project, which Vanessa, who started this webinar today, has a big part in. This project is a collaborative project similar to a lot of the Migrations Initiative project. It was founded in 2019 with a group of students together with Professor Beth Lyon from the law school at Cornell to think about ways that we can detect and respond to xenophobia that happens online. We had 2020 partners were Mozilla and a Cornell Hack for Impact. And then we were very fortunate to be funded in 2021 by the Migrations Initiative and the Einaudi Center. And today we are working on this, Professor Beth Lyon, me, and Professor Martin van Schindel from linguistics. As I said, this is a collaborative project which requires understanding from multiple areas, and I will be presenting more the information science side of this project. So what we're going to talk about today is we'll look at what exactly is xenophobia and what does it look like when we go online. How do we detect xenophobic behaviors in social media and track them? And how do we respond to that? So what is xenophobia? The term is usually traditionally being described as fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners. But of course, it goes a long way beyond just this fear or hatred. It goes back to considering how people, other people that are around them, and thinking about in-group and out-group forces that shape the way that we think about ourselves and about other people. But it also goes into scapegoating other groups when we are in a stressful situation or in unwanted situations, thinking about what is this other group of people doing wrong to us that is causing this situation. It targets both foreign countries and immigrants, and it's usually, but not always, intertwined with racist hatred. What you see here in this image is a flyer that was placed in 1942 outside in San Francisco, outside of a shelter home, instructing all people from Japanese ancestry to be relocated to camps. And this is an act of xenophobia that happened many years ago and was targeting specific individuals who were, many of them were American Japanese, as well as people who weren't citizens of the US at that time. So xenophobic behaviors or acts can take place both on the side of governments and institutions, like the flyer that calls out Japanese people to move away from where they live right now, and all the way to individual aggression or individual acts, even acts that are microaggressions against specific individuals who don't exactly look like us. And it can happen everywhere. It may happen anywhere. This is an example of an Instagram post by the UC Berkeley at the beginning of 2020, which almost normalized acts of xenophobia by telling people that it's okay to be fearful about people who are from Asia. This was at the outset of the coronavirus pandemic. This specific post created a lot of calls from a lot of people around the country, and eventually, or pretty quickly actually, UC Berkeley took this post down. But the idea that they initially thought about this possibility and normalizing it and saying it's okay to be fearful about people who are not like you is an act of xenophobia. So there could be a lot of unique consequences of xenophobia. It could be migration policies like the one we're seeing at the bottom left here, a rendering of a border patrol agent who is separating families at the border. It could be using xenophobic speech to distort political processes. It could be focused on showing hate against specific world regions or countries, and it could be a language discrimination. This is a sign that appears at the entrance of a restaurant in Philadelphia, which went through court cases, and they were allowed to keep this sign on. So, and of course, this is not limited to the US. What you are seeing here are two awful pictures. The one on the left shows residents who are watching bulldozers who are raging their homes in the Roma quarter in Sofia, Bulgaria. And on the right side, you can see the aerial view of a burnt Rohingya village in Myanmar. So acts of xenophobia that are happening, again, both at the government level and institutional level and individual levels, can happen anywhere in the world. So let's think about how does this move to online? We've seen so far mostly offline cases. So trigger events like terror attacks, the most famous one is the 9/11 terror attack, but contentious court cases or court decisions or signed bills will change and shape the way that people think about and perceive races, ethnicity, origins, or religions. People might see as a result of these trigger events, immigrants as a threat to their economic success and to their national identity. And they're also seeing immigrants as outsiders who are disrupting social and cultural homogeneity of their state that they live in. As a result of that, we see violent attacks and hate speech happening offline as well as online. So what does it look like online? Here are 3 examples. On the top left, you can see a tweet by the Fair Immigration that's asking Biden to enforce the Remain in Mexico policy. At the bottom left, you can see a tweet by an English person who's referring to an Afghan refugee as taking advantage of the British social welfare. And on the right side, you see a Facebook page of a group called Tijuana Against the Migrant Caravan from 2018. So all these are examples of xenophobic behavior that happens online. And again, they can come from individuals like this Archie person on the bottom left, and they can come from groups and organizations like the Fair Immigration or the Tijuana Against the Migrant Caravan. And what do social media platforms do about this? So they actually have a lot of processes in place to try to fight xenophobic behavior. They publish policies against hate speech. At the top right here, you see the beginning of the policy of Twitter about hateful conduct that is not allowed to be presented on Twitter. At the bottom right here, you see the policy from Meta, which hosts Facebook, on what is not allowed to be posted, and anything that is hateful is also not allowed to be posted on Facebook. They also employ thousands of content moderators. Facebook is known to host at least 15,000 moderators who comb through content and flag content that is going to be removed. They apply artificial intelligence techniques that detect hate speech and flag it for removal. And they have user interfaces that allow you as a personal user to report on content that you think is hateful speech. And as a result of these, they remove some content and they may ban accounts. And we've seen that this actually happened. So here is an example of blocking millions of pieces of harmful content. And you can see that hate speech is actually has 32 million pieces of Facebook hateful speech has been removed. On YouTube, also violence and violence extremism. Twitter also has their own blocking of hateful conduct, which is quite a lot of content on them. But they don't do enough. First of all, they don't publish their artificial intelligence methods for detecting hate speech. They only remove a small fraction of hate speech posts that are detected by AI. There has been some research by from the Wired magazine that has been published at the Wired magazine that says that not even 40% of hate speech is being removed by Facebook. And also a lot of this hateful speech can actually evade those artificial intelligence models and techniques because people can use typos intentionally to evade detection of hate speech. And of course, this hate speech doesn't specifically address xenophobia. It takes hate speech at the very wide sense. And so this leads us to the Xenophobia Meter project, which has 3 goals. First of all, we want to provide data about xenophobic online speech and how it relates to policy choices that are made by governments and institutions, including also corporations. The other goal is to help the general public take action against xenophobic speech. That's starting with Twitter, and over time, we hope to extend this to other social media. And finally, we want to create a publicly available real-time early warning system about rising xenophobia that's happening online, which reflects also what happens offline. And so this also part of the questions that we grapple in trying to achieve these goals is what is the current state and trends of xenophobic speech in social media? We need to be able to answer this question if we want to achieve the goals of the Xenophobia Meter project. So our approach to this is to leverage computation and automation so we can increase the global awareness of xenophobia online. Again, using computational methods so we can detect and comb a lot of the content that goes on in social media. The first step would be to collect and label social media data so we can train a machine learning algorithm to detect xenophobic speech. And then the second step, after we are able to create this machine learning algorithm that works effectively and is able to detect xenophobic speech with high accuracy, is to make the content publicly accessible through visualizations of the results of the algorithm. So what you see here at the bottom is basically the way that we go about collecting, labeling social media data, training a machine learning model, and then evaluating the model. And this all feeds back into improving the machine learning algorithm. We are currently in the very first stage of the project. We're in the process of gathering 10,000 tweets, and we're starting from Twitter because Twitter is very text focused and it's easier to initially train a machine learning algorithm to detect xenophobia that happens through text than visual or video content. We currently have 4,000 tweets that have been labeled by 3 labelers, and then close to 5,000 tweets that have been labeled by 2 labelers. And we hope to get each tweet labeled by 3 labelers. I'll show you in a few minutes why. So this is our meter. The Xenophobia Meter project is about a meter. We're taking every single tweet and we want to give it a score on this meter from very xenophobic through neutral to very pro-foreigner. And this will help us get the trend of what is going on online in social media and how it's changing over time. So let's look at a few examples here and think about which one of this is pro-foreigner, which one of this is xenophobic, what's the level of pro or anti-foreigner content here, and how do we know this? So the first tweet from the Fair Immigration says the following: Joe Biden, no deportations for illegal aliens until they commit a felony. So the FAIR is the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which fights for a stronger America with controlled borders, reduced immigration, and better enforcement. The use of illegal aliens is considered a xenophobic slur. And so this tweet that uses this slur is pretty much anti-foreigner in the sense that it's calling out to, it's mocking Joe Biden and calling out for immigrants as illegal aliens. The second tweet, tomorrow 9/22, racial profiling, hate crimes, and education are just some important civil rights issues impacting AAPIs. Here are experts. So is this pro-foreigner? Is this xenophobic? How do we know? So this is actually not very much immigrant related. It's some guidelines that we need to think about. Is this about immigrants? Is this about general hate crimes? Is it about general race? So as we are labeling tweets, we need to think about how are we going to rate this specific tweet. And at the bottom, we see a tweet from ICE. ICE highlights critical partnerships with law enforcement agencies. Is this pro-foreigner? Is this anti-foreigner? Well, you can think about how partnership with law enforcement, it can mean calling for more efficient work against immigrants. So is this against immigrants, against foreigners, or not? Really, these are really difficult questions that we are facing every day as we are trying to label tweets, and that the machine learning algorithm will need to face as well and decide on each one of these tweets what's the level of xenophobia on them. So there are a lot of issues with labeling tweets. There are some nuances of human language and communication. We can think about sarcasm. We think about neutral words that are actually not exactly neutral. We can think about facts versus opinions. Okay, so for example, the top right tweet here from ICE is a pretty common type of tweet that ICE creates, which talks about ICE deports Chinese man wanted for multi-million-dollar loan scam. And I actually removed the picture of the person from this tweet because this is a pretty common thing that ICE does in their tweets. They are criminalizing people by connecting foreign people with criminal activity. So making this connection is shaping people's perception around the connection between foreign people and criminal activity. Another issue with labeling tweets is contextual knowledge. So you can think about the bottom right tweet here from the FAIR Immigration. Representatives call for H-2B expansion during continued employment crisis. So labelers, as well as the machine learning algorithm, need to know what the H-2B visa rules are and policy is in order to be able to think about whether this tweet is, what's the level of xenophobia on this tweet. We can think about labeler bias. So our labelers, they can have different political opinions about foreigners, and this can shape the way that they think about what is more or less xenophobic. They can also have differing levels of confidence. Is this more fact-based or is this more opinion-based? People can have different levels of confidence about their degree of labeling the tweets. And we wish to arrive at a reliability across labelers that is at least 80%. So if we have multiple labelers who are labeling every tweet, and the reason is that every machine algorithm is only going to be as good as the labeled data set. It can't be better than what humans are labeling algorithms. So how do we respond to these issues? First of all, we train our labelers. And Vanessa, who started this webinar today, she's actually the person who's doing a lot of this training, and she's the person who is involved very much in doing this work and working with the labelers so they get up to speed. What you're seeing here is a screenshot from one of our labeler training meetings from a few months ago. We also have a list of labeling guidelines and a list of slurs, of xenophobic slurs. So wait, no, these are the guidelines. So the guidelines provide labelers with examples or categories of why a specific tweet would be very xenophobic, slightly xenophobic, neutral, and so on. And so include some guidelines about what should be thought about as more or less xenophobic in tweets with some examples. We also allow our, and these are the examples of slurs that we use. It's a very long list of racial and xenophobic slurs that we use to detect whether a specific tweet is considered more or less xenophobic. So the use of these slurs will mean that a tweet is more xenophobic. We also let our labelers to rate the level of confidence in their when they label tweets. So are you confident or are you not confident? We have, as I said before, multiple labelers for each tweet. So it's not just this one person who decides on the rating of xenophobia of every specific tweet. And we have calibration meetings. So every time multiple tweets or a certain tweet is ranked or rated by multiple labelers, if they disagree on the rating, let's say one person said that this is neutral because it is only a fact, and another person said that this is very xenophobic, we have calibration meetings where the labelers get together and discuss these disagreements and decide on what this tweet should be labeled. And finally, we've been working on developing a labeling application. This is a screenshot from this application that shows at the top a specific tweet. And then the user who's the labeler can rate this tweet on different levels of xenophobia, from very xenophobic to very pro-foreigner, choose why they decided to rate this and move on. They can also rate their confidence level and decide if this is even foreigner related or not. And if they have no idea what to do with this tweet, they can skip to the next tweet. So we're working on developing tools for labelers so they can better work on thinking about every single tweet, and they have a very simple user interface for that. So what are our next steps? First of all, once we have the 10K label dataset, which is a multi-month project with many labelers that Vanessa, Professor Lyon, and me are working to train, then we will train and evaluate a machine learning algorithm so we can detect xenophobic speech on Twitter. Then we want to create a publicly available warning system about rising xenophobic speech. So imagine a website that includes this kind of visualization that shows how xenophobic speech is occurring more or less in different countries, that is harvested from Twitter initially and then expanding to other social media. Of course, we're starting with US-based tweets, but we plan to also expand this to other countries because xenophobia happens online all around the world. And then making this kind of website available for governments, for organizations, for corporations, for activist groups, for policymakers, and for researchers who can use this to move policy, shame governments that are enacting xenophobic behaviors, and shame organizations that are enacting it and trying to bring up more positive change. So we want to surface and quantify the different kinds of communications that are happening. So again, what you're seeing in the left side is another example of taking a picture of a person, which we covered here, and connecting their origin, in this case from Mexico, connecting them with criminal activity. And so we want to move away from these kinds of communications to the kind of communication that we see here on the right, which is celebrating the success and the connection of people who are coming from other countries to a specific country and having positive economic and social connections to the new country that they're in. So refrain from demonizing and instead engage in positive speech in social media. And we want to promote positive change in this case. So what you're seeing here on the left is a tweet from the president of South Africa who's condemning attacks on foreign nationals. And here on the right side, you can see a poster that was issued by the South African government helping people to pledge against xenophobia, against any violence for people who are from other countries. And of course, we know that posters don't create change, but we hope to surface these issues so we can encourage more people to participate in this positive behavior. Looking forward, we want to be able to identify ever-changing xenophobic sentiment online. We want to make this transparent. We want people to be accountable for xenophobic speech that they engage in, sometimes unintentionally, and try to mitigate bias unintentionally, similar to the UC Berkeley Instagram post that was taken down. And we want, of course, we want to avoid the blind artificial intelligence euphoria. As I said, algorithms are easy to evade. People can always intentionally use typos to evade the algorithm that will detect slurs. And we want to balance the harms and the benefits of machine learning in these algorithms. We want to be able to consume other media types like images and videos, and we hope that this will help with more data gathering, iterating over the model. We hope to extend our academic collaborations, extend to other platforms. And I guess this is it. I want to thank everyone, and I'll open up the floor for questions. I do want to say that, again, this is a collaborative project from people from multiple disciplines. So Professor Beth Lyon, who's not able to be here today because she's teaching, is not able to answer a lot of the legal questions that a lot of you might have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Gilly. I really appreciate hearing this and seeing this to fruition. I know this has been underway for a while. We have a series of questions, some of them more substantive, others more technical. And I guess I'll start with some of the technical questions first, just because it helps people understand what the undertaking is that you are involved in. And one, there's a series of questions regarding the how to do this research. One has to do with this idea of essentially intercoder reliability and how you bring together the different labelers. And can you say a little bit more about that logic? I'm going to give these to you together, and you can decide how to talk about them. The other question has to do with the actual coding of, or the labeling, as you call it, of the tweets. One person asks, for example, is this word recognition only with text searches, or are you also looking at images? Is that possible to do? And finally, because we know that a lot of these end up being really complicated threads, how much contextual information are you able to include from retweets and replies and all the rest? So maybe we'll deal with those first, and then I have some broader questions for you.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And thank you for the people who asked this question. So in terms of labeler disagreement, every labeler has a set of tweets that they are labeling each week. At the end of the week, one person will collect all these labels together and put them against each other. So if three people labeled the same tweet, they would then get together and see what are some of the differences between what each person labeled. We put it in a simple spreadsheet at this point. And then if the differences are too wide, and what we call wide is 2 or more, so the difference between -3 and -1 is considered wide enough to start a conversation, the three labelers will basically get in a conversation and discuss what made you label this -3, what made you label this a -1, what are the differences, what are some of the issues that maybe I didn't see that you did see in this tweet, and then reaching an agreement on that label. Your other question about how do you know whether a specific tweet is, what level of xenophobia is? Do we just look at the text? Do we look at retweets? Do we look at visual content? The labeler is instructed to look at the full text of the tweet, and if there are links that are leading from that tweet, to also go to these links. We currently don't look at video material, but we do have access to the visual content. So if there is an image, we have access to that. It's very difficult to prevent a labeler from looking at the visual. They are instructed to go to the link, and often these links will go to external websites with news contents, popular media, and so, public websites. And this is also something that a machine learning algorithm can also follow that trail and go to a link and look at the text of that content. So we're looking at the content, at the text itself of the tweet, but we also noticed that one big factor in determining the degree of xenophobia or pro versus anti-foreigner of a tweet is the source of the tweet. So groups and organizations that are calling more for strict boundaries and strict policies against immigrants are more likely to create tweets that are more anti-foreigner, whereas groups that are actively working to help immigrants in the US are going to usually include tweets that are more pro-foreigners.
Thanks, Gilly. When I think about this, there's so many really interesting applications across a number of different contexts. But, just sticking with the idea of how we think about xenophobia and the very specific ways in which that operates, for example, in the United States and the deep histories behind it, one of the questions was, how do we think about how this work might carry across multiple languages and cultures? And in my case, thinking about the United States, I also wondered, the connection to existing racist tropes and the deep histories of that really matter. One of the questions in the chat was referring to the Geno Steaks down in South Philly, which I don't know if you're as familiar with this, but there is. I'm sure Beth is because she spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, but they for about a decade had a big sign in their front window saying, speak English, and it finally came down. And, if you wanted to understand the history of that sign, you'd have to know something about South Philly, about the Italian market, about the history of even the Italian communities that moved in and out of there. And so it's both, how do we think about applying this broadly across cultures and languages in the here and now, but even very specific region and neighborhood dynamics. And so can you talk about that and how that translates online or not?
Yeah, that is a great question. Thanks, Shannon. So let's start by thinking about across borders. So xenophobia looks very different and targets different groups in different countries. So in Europe, it might be targeting Roma people, it might be targeting immigrants from the Middle East and from Africa. In South Africa, we're seeing xenophobic behavior against people from Africa who are coming from other countries in Africa. And in the US, we see a lot of xenophobic behavior against Latin American countries. And of course, these are things that are, we will have to extend this to other countries and other languages, but we are starting with the US. Once we're able to have a stable machine learning algorithm that deals with US-based English language, then we will start by moving it to other countries. And of course, we will have to have labelers who are from those countries, who are situated in the context and understand what that country looks like in terms of xenophobic behaviors that are happening both at the institutional level and at the individual level. But we're actually not there yet. We're only looking at US-based. But what you said is also thinking about more smaller cultures within the US and trying to distinguish between the understandings of these cultures, and maybe trying to distinguish between xenophobia and racism. Again, these are nuances that personally, I'm not sure that a machine learning algorithm is going to be sensitive enough to pick up. But thinking about racism versus xenophobia, that's already a pretty difficult distinguish for a machine learning algorithm. And this is why a lot of the social media platforms, they have this umbrella of hate speech and not trying to look at the nuances of xenophobia versus racism versus other forms of hate speech. And we're hoping that our algorithm will get there because our labelers are doing this distinction. But I actually don't know if the algorithm will be nuanced enough to look at the specific local cultures. I don't know if we're going to have enough content, enough data, so we can have this kind of nuanced understanding.
Right. And it might not be that it's really the task of distinguishing, but to identify the intersections between, racist speech and xenophobia, certainly. This gets another, point of the question, which you raised a little bit, which is kind of who's behind these tweets. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts in terms of how do you make sense of all this? You gave some examples of groups that are certainly, using Twitter as a platform to push forward an agenda or mission, but then you also have individuals. And so I'm curious, how do you think about the unit of analysis here, right? An individual tweet as being, either the poster themselves, the individual, or the movement, or even the organization behind it? And how should we be thinking about this? And how should regulators really be thinking about this? And if you could say a little bit about that conceptually, because there's not really an easy way to track that just by looking at a tweet itself, right? And so
Yes.
it could be just the specific intern.
Yeah.
Right?
No, this is a great question. We are initially looking at tweets that are coming out of verified accounts of either high-profile individuals or organizations and groups. And the reason is that if we comb the entire Twitter world, we will drown in a lot of irrelevant content. And so if we want to have a better understanding of if we do identify a tweet, a social media post that is about foreigners and has some kind of a sentiment against or pro foreigners, then we want to start with tweets that are more likely to have that kind of content. And then individuals, every specific individual who also has a Twitter account, it's going to be very, very difficult to find out that one tweet that they created or a small number of tweets that they created that are about foreigners and that we can label as related to this. And that's why we're starting with verified accounts from institutions, groups, and organizations. And then once we have a stable algorithm, then we can use that to look at a wider set of tweets.
Thanks. And, that gets a little bit to my next question, because certainly if it's an organization or a verified account, and even as an individual, sometimes there's professionals, who are in place really thinking through the wording of these tweets. But with individuals, it's a little bit different. And I know there's a series of hypotheses out there about how activity online translates to real life. And I've heard some hypotheses say, we're more muted online, and others say, well, we unleash more vitriol than we otherwise would if you had to actually face the humanity of someone in front of you. And I'm wondering how you see that affecting, again, how you interpret this. And certainly for verified accounts, it might have a different impact. But as a measure for the temperature of xenophobia, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is a great question. And my answer to it would be very different 20 years ago than it is for today. So 20 years ago, when people were trying out social media and participating in generating content, there was a very strict dichotomy between what happened online and what happened offline. And, the very famous New Yorker picture of the dog on the internet, it doesn't happen today anymore. The boundaries between the online and the offline are almost not there in many places. People have Facebook accounts that are connected to their real self and to their real identity. And what people are doing in the quote unquote virtual environment, it's a very real environment for a lot of people, for those who are creating the content and those who are being affected by this content. And so there are policies for online interactions, but those are shaped by, and they are shaping policies that are happening offline, like work policies, immigration policies. All of these are shaped by, and they are shaping the policies for how people should and can interact online. And these are enforced by technological means, which online can be code and offline can be police, borders, roads, and so on.
And, is the question of kind of policing this raises a number of questions, and Beth isn't here to field the kind of regulatory minutia. But again, there's been a lot of interests in Congress, included bringing people from then Facebook and other Twitter to account for some of the societal impacts of this, and the general I think balance even on this campus we see is this question between, on the one hand, free speech, and on the other hand, hate speech, or and what is the responsibility of institutions and platforms, and I wondered, again, there's we may have answered this differently 10 years ago, but I wonder how your team is thinking about that in terms of the implications in the policy arena, given the spotlight that has been placed both on the impacts of this speech and even kind of looking retroactively at the roots of some of the horrendous events that we've seen. And so what are your thoughts about how you could inform those discussions?
Yeah, that's a very great question that I'm not sure I have the exact answer for. And a lot of the social media platforms, they actually present themselves as a platform. They're not responsible for, they're a channel, and they are not responsible to what flows in that channel, but they are responsible. When YouTube allows people to upload videos, they should be accountable to the content of the videos that people are uploading. And the same with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all the other social media platforms. They should be accountable to what they are allowing people and organizations to use their platform for. And so I believe in enforcing certain policies on what is and is not allowed to be put on these platforms. And yes, there is a fine balance between free speech and moving on to illegal behavior, and finding that that boundary is something that policymakers and the tech companies should always seek for, because these groups are always going to try to find a way through this boundary.
Yeah, and one of our commenters really was kind of pushing us on this point to think about what are the incentive structures, either to comply with additional regulation or to allow this kind of free for all. And they were wondering, what kind of information have you gleaned about the financial interests that perhaps exist, or other interests of allowing xenophobic speech to remain? Kind of the cynical take is that in some ways allowing this to remain has created additional users. For certain platforms, definitely it can even be a way to raise money around hateful campaigns, which have had real harm. And we've seen this even in the last years, and with the trials that are happening right now around January 6th. And so I'm wondering, kind of what are your thoughts on just seeing the context of where this is coming from? What do you say to this question of, is there a financial interest in allowing xenophobic speech to remain, or are there broader forces kind of driving the inertia of deregulating this space and kind of staving off a more hands-on approach?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that I can answer this question, that I know what drives financially the tech corporations that are holding these platforms. They are driven by having many, a high number of users on their platforms, but allowing or not allowing xenophobic speech on them, I don't know how this translates to the financial incentives of these platforms. So I'm not sure I have a good answer for this one.
Maybe put more broadly, folks are wondering, have tech companies approached you, or do you have an idea of how to bring this information to tech companies? And why might they be interested in this? Or if they have come to you, what are their interests in thinking through these data and in your findings?
Yeah, I agree. This is a good question that actually I have been talking with people who work in these companies, not representatives who are working on this specific topic, but the big tech giants, they want to make money. Obviously, this is their bottom line. But there are a lot of people who work in these companies who are interested in ethical behavior of the company that they work for. And they really want to make sure that the company that they work for, whether it's Meta for Facebook or Twitter or Snap, that their platform that they work on is used for ethical reasons and not for a free for all.
And relatedly, they're probably not the only actor perhaps involved in or interested in these data. Certainly there's policymakers themselves, but then there's also justice movement groups. And I'm wondering your thoughts on where this might help inform some of the efforts to try to make the tech world, but just technology more generally, more equitable and to kind of stave off the divisive nature of what you've been looking at. And we know that there's been certainly within Silicon Valley efforts to hold tech companies accountable for a whole range of things. We know that, for example, Tim Ritt, Gabru and Alex Hanna have been looking at the kind of implications of race and racial equality. And certainly there's probably parallel efforts in the tech world. And I'm wondering how might those who are wanting to use these data as a platform help move that forward with your findings?
That's actually one of the reasons that we're doing this, by visualizing what's happening on social media in terms of xenophobic content. This can mobilize and this can provide evidence for groups that are working on social justice to move forward with their efforts. It doesn't only validate the personal experiences of individuals, but it also presents to groups that are working in that space as real evidence for the fact that xenophobia is happening online, by whom, and how to guide their efforts in moving forward in that space.
I'm curious what the time frame of this work looks like. It looks like, a lot of times in research we are focused so much on the end result, but it seems like even beyond the effort to kind of train the algorithm, there's just a lot of conceptual work that has to go into this kind of work. And I wonder if you could say more about what those next steps are in the research agenda and what that means in terms of what's needed to really provide a holistic view of, in this case, xenophobia. But if we're looking at the online world, it's not that you can just create an algorithm to automate every aspect of your research. You have to give it the input that is informed by the conceptual and socio-legal work that you and your collaborators are doing. So can you say more about kind of what the timeline looks like and what that will mean for the future of the project?
Yeah, so as I said, we're currently in the process of labeling 10,000 tweets that will then be used to train a machine learning algorithm. In this process, we're also looking at the linguistic factors. What does a xenophobic tweet look like linguistically? Beyond the specific individual words that are being used, maybe using slurs, but also it's very hard to detect sarcasm in a tweet in a single sentence by a computational technique. And what might we look at these specific tweets individually so we can transfer this from a person who has more contextual knowledge to a machine that doesn't have this knowledge. And in this process, we're trying, as you said, to understand conceptually, what does xenophobic speech look like? And when you're taking it to online posts, what do they look like when they're translated from the way that we speak in offline to these kinds to this new genre, basically. So this is our current efforts, which we are hoping to finish off this semester. And then during the summer and into next year, we're hoping to complete the computational model and create the visualizations that will be available to the public. Obviously, we don't have a business model. So this is not going to be a commercial product that we can ship off and have someone maintain for a long term. But we're hoping that some nonprofits might be interested in taking the knowledge that we're producing from here and using that to create commercially available products that can be used by the public, by governments, by organizations, and by individuals to understand the xenophobic meter or the trends of xenophobia online.
Yeah, you raise a really important point, which is how do you, once you've put all this work in, how do institutions and researchers carry that responsibility of democratizing that knowledge to then be used in other movements? And it strikes me that there's just a lot of applications that could be really relevant to this type of work, both in terms of the xenophobia and the orthogonal issues of racism, for sure. But then also, there's so many concerns right now around transphobia and its very real impacts on the safety of folks in the community, misogyny, anti-Blackness. And I'm wondering, to what extent do you think the lessons learned from this work carry over into these different arenas? I mean, all emanating under that umbrella of hate speech. But in what ways would you caution just kind of a cookie cutter approach? What is the kind of very specific ways in which a research team who say wanted to pick this up and apply this to another arena, what kind of things would they need to keep in mind before they got started?
So as you've seen through this talk, our major efforts right now are really, first of all, to try to understand what xenophobic speech looks like when it comes to this, again, as I call it, the genre of Twitter. And so there is no cookie cutter here. You can't just take the techniques of trying to understand xenophobia in Twitter and then take it to other forms of hate speech that are happening on Twitter. There is no escape from doing, again, this heavy conceptual work of trying to understand what other forms of hate speech look like. But it is possible that a lot of the understandings that we have in terms of how do you pull out some of the tweets, how do you choose which tweets to train the machine learning algorithm on? So maybe it is focusing on institutional tweets or organization tweets that are coming out of organizations as opposed to the general public. Or maybe you can use the understandings that we had around how to train the labelers and how to calibrate the labeling that's happening across different people, how to use contextual knowledge to label tweets that will then feed into the algorithm. So I think those understandings that go beyond the specific topic that we're working on can actually translate to other forms of trying to understand trends of inappropriate behavior that is happening online.
And it's interesting because you mentioned how if we were to do this in another country, or if you were going to apply it to another place, you'd really need folks who came from those cultures and those contexts to be able to do this initial work. And it strikes me that, when deciphering whether something falls into a particular category, there's probably a lot of negotiating at the margins. And I'm curious if you could give us a sense of certain tweets or certain kind of concepts that you maybe saw divergent labeling about and you had to, as a team, kind of come to an agreement on. One of the questions in the chat had to do with, for example, the question of a white savior syndrome. And we can interpret that in a number of different ways, but really the positionality of the person labeling might very much view that in a different way. And so can you say a little bit about how you, from a project management and a PI, how do you work with that both as an asset, but as a way to inform the decisions that you need to make as a team to be able to move forward and do this work over thousands of tweets?
Yes. Yes, this is a question that we're grappling with every day. Labelers need to have a wide knowledge of the context that surrounds foreigner policies in this country, in this specific country, because we're currently labeling US-based tweets. And without this knowledge and without being aware of the news that's happening around this, it's very difficult to label tweets. And so that's why we have those calibration meetings where people who had differing thoughts about about a specific tweet will get together and kind of defend their own labeling and then try to get together into an understanding. And often the misunderstanding comes from lack of contextual knowledge. Misunderstanding, for example, where this tweet comes from. A great example is news pieces or facts. A certain organization like ICE can say ICE deported a person from a certain country because they were engaged in criminal activity. So on the one hand, it looks almost like a factual tweet. It's not related to being anti-foreigner. But the fact that someone decided to put this out on Twitter, as opposed to other kinds of content that could be put out on Twitter, or deciding to link the origin of the person to their criminal activity, this is in itself an act of xenophobia because it is highlighting the connections between people from other countries and illegal activity. It's not highlighting other ways that this person is part of this country or other people from that country are becoming stronger parts of this country.
Well, I want to thank you, Gilly. This has been really just exciting to see this come together. I wondered also if students were interested, as we close here, if students were interested in pursuing this line of research. You yourself are an InfoSci, but there's a number of different ways that one could come into this work. Can you say, just before we end, because people may not totally understand the real interdisciplinary effort that this has required, where have you seen there be opportunities to kind of inform this kind of work on campus disciplinarily in terms of the courses being offered, et cetera, for folks who want to head down this route and learn more about the work that you're doing?
So first of all, Beth and I were offering a seminar class this semester. I think today's the last day to add classes. And we call this class Detecting Xenophobia Online. And we're engaging in weekly readings about xenophobia, how it appears online, how we can detect it, and how we can respond to it. So we're running this class this semester. We're bringing in great guest speakers, and we're discussing articles and the literature about this topic. And so if students are interested, they can join this class. We also offer research opportunities. So because we have this project that we're working on, students can engage as labelers. That's the easiest way to participate, to become a labeler and help with this effort. Computer science students are invited to help come and participate in helping developing software. I have two great freshman students who are helping us with finalizing the labeling application. And we will need more help in creating the machine learning algorithm and feeding it into visualization. My area, human-computer interaction, trains students who are interested in user experience design. We need those people too, students who are interested in trying to understand who is this audience and how do we design a visualization for this audience so they can understand it in the easiest way and act upon this information that they're getting from the visualization. And of course, students who are interested in political science and government and legal aspects, they are welcome to contact Beth and work with her on research efforts.
Well, thanks so much, Gilly, and to the rest of your team. And I hope to continue the conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.